Hello, welcome and thanks for joining us. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. The headlines this hour. For the first time since May, Hamas fires 2 long-range rockets at Tel Aviv. One falls in the sea, the other falls in Gaza. Iran says only a ceasefire in Gaza could stop it from attacking Israel. Ceasefire and hostage talks are due to take place on Thursday. And as if tensions weren't high enough, a 4.8 magnitude earthquake felt in Syria, Lebanon and Israel. And for the first time in 3 months, Hamas fired rockets at Tel Aviv this afternoon. It sent 2 long-range rockets. One fell in the sea and a second fell short and landed in Gaza. The Israeli Home Front Command did not warn of the incoming missiles as they were not deemed a risk. Well, after multiple reports that an Iranian strike on Israel was imminent, an Iranian official has told the Reuters news agency that a ceasefire in Gaza could deter Tehran. Another round of negotiations on a hostage and ceasefire deal is due to take place on Thursday, and the US envoy to the region, Amos Hochstein, is on his way to Lebanon and Israel in the latest diplomatic effort to head off a regional war. Our senior correspondent, Bianca Zanini, has the latest.
The 9th of the Hebrew months of Av, the anniversary of the destruction of the biblical temples, has arrived. And still no sign of an Iranian attack, despite some predictions. Yet Israel remains vigilant.
We are in days of vigilance and preparedness. The threats from Tehran, as well as Beirut, may come to fruition. And it is important to explain to everyone that readiness, preparation and alertness are not synonyms for fear and panic.
Trying to de-escalate the situation, the leaders of the United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany and Italy released this Monday a joint statement pushing for negotiations on a Gaza ceasefire and declaring support for Israel in case of an Iranian attack. What was supposed to create an impasse for Iran was received with anger in Tehran. The Iranian Foreign Ministry said that the statement, quote, lacks political logic, contradict principles of international law, and that Iran will not be bullied into submission. But some Iranian sources say the country will only attack if the Gaza truce talks fail, or it perceives that Israel is stalling the negotiations. In preparation, the US has ordered the deployment of a guided missile submarine to the Middle East, sending a message to Iran.
Share the same concerns and expectations that our Israeli counterparts have with respect to potential timing here. Could be this week. It is difficult to ascertain at this particular time if there is an attack by Iran and or its proxies, what that could look like. But we have to be prepared for what could be a significant set of attacks.
While the United States is prepared for a response, President Joe Biden seemed to remain calm about the situation, a feeling shared by many in Israeli society.
We are not afraid.
There is a stress in the air, but we're in the beach and we feel good.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Dan Perry is the author of Ask Questions Later, a newsletter, and the former Europe and Middle East editor for the Associated Press. Good to see you, Dan. Thank you very much for joining us. So the Iranians have tied their attack on Israel now, it would seem, to the hostage talks due to take place on Thursday. Do you think they're trying to climb down from the very tall tree that they find themselves up?
It kind of looks that way. It would give them an exit ramp, as it were, because I don't think they necessarily want a huge war. They have gained so much, sad to say, from the past 10 months in a variety of ways that we can discuss at length later if you wish, that they would be wise to sort of take yes for an answer and de-escalate. Instead, they've maneuvered themselves into a position where their pride has forced them to threaten what would amount to an escalation. Now, it is a strange statement, because if an attack on Israel is somehow necessary, and they're honor-bound to do that as a result of the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran while they were hosting him, that's one narrative. I fail to see how that connects to the talks in Gaza. It almost sounds like now they're threatening Israel, talks about Gaza. It sounds like they're threatening Israel with attack unless Israel capitulates to Hamas in some form or another, which is a whole different story. Or would they be willing to swallow their pride as a reward to Israel? It's an odd sort of linkage that fundamentally suggests that they both would like to compel a deal in Gaza and that they would like a way to climb down. It's nonetheless reassuring that they would like to compel a deal in Gaza, because it's kind of understood that a deal in Gaza is the beginning of the wind down of the war, which again suggests that they don't want a bigger war. Otherwise, they wouldn't necessarily be trying to influence things that way.
Do you think that's their own calculations? They've realised that it might not be a great idea to attack Israel because of the consequences, how Israel might hit them back? Or do you think this is a result of all the very serious diplomatic efforts in recent days from everyone, from the Americans to the Arabs to the Europeans?
I think they're very much connected. The United States, by moving in all the weapons of war that they have moved in, and by threatening them publicly with devastating consequences should they miscalculate, I think changed the equation, rebalanced the equation, and it's clear that despite the antipathy of the Biden administration to the Netanyahu government, this is an exception and it will come to the aid of Israel. As I've said on numerous occasions, the Iranian regime is rather brittle, and I don't think they would welcome devastating consequences that would almost, well, with a high degree of probability, reignite demonstrations and opposition activity in Iran itself, which could be effective in the context of a war where the regime's infrastructure and centers of power are being attacked and destroyed.
And they've also said that the waiting is part of the punishment, as they put it, for Israel. And that is to a certain extent true, isn't it? Because here we are day after day trying to calculate when the Iranians will attack. You know, flights have been cancelled. There has been disruption. People are worried and anxious. I mean, it has been a success in some ways.
I mean, I think most Israelis will take that to, you know, a great loss of life. But yeah, it's psychological warfare that amounts to a form of psychological torture. And sure, let them have that victory. They succeeded in putting the Israelis on edge.
All right, Dan, for now, thank you very much. Well, Israel's northern city of Haifa is on the front line of any potential attack by the Lebanese group Hezbollah, and emergency systems are in place and on high alert, as our Dana Avni now reports.
In response to escalating regional tensions, the northern Israeli city of Haifa has moved its command center underground to a fortified bomb shelter. Since October 7th, when Hezbollah began lobbing missiles and drones at northern Israel, this facility has been operating around the clock, prepared for any crisis.
This is the main room. All the management of the city are coming over here. From the beginning of an attack or any other emergency action. For us, the whole city is important. So even one of the missiles will, I don't know, it will miss the port. It will be inside the city. So we are dealing with the parts of the cities where citizens are living in.
The command center monitors all areas of Haifa, ensuring that even a single incident within the city is managed efficiently.
We are here from the beginning of the war, from the 7th of October, and it's working 24/7. And especially starting from the last 10 days.
Haifa's emergency preparedness extends beyond the command center to a network of public bomb shelters. These shelters are automatically activated during alarms and are equipped with essential amenities.
You can see here the number of the calls that we have from the beginning of the morning, 438 calls. The number is increasing these days. It's not the usual number, so more people are calling, more of them are asking about information. Most information is about finding bomb shelters.
Public shelters can accommodate up to 50 people and are equipped with air conditioning generators and Wi-Fi to ensure comfort and communication during emergencies. With this fully functioning command center, Haifa is ready to safeguard its population during these tense times.
Well, let's get an update on what is happening in the north of Israel. Our correspondent Nicole Zedek is in the town of Kiryat Shmona, one of the worst affected towns, which has been almost completely evacuated, hasn't it, Nicole? And we've had a couple of days of relative calm, I guess you could say. Is that calm holding? And how might the arrival of the American envoy Amos Hochstein affect the situation?
The fact that Amos Hochstein is in the Middle East region is certainly a positive sign, at least for the time being, because that indicates that the United States thinks at this point there is still room for a diplomatic solution. If they didn't think there was any possibility, it's very unlikely that Hochstein would be traveling to the region. So this is almost a last-minute push from the United States as tensions are very, very high, and Hezbollah continues to say that they will retaliate for the IDF's killing of that Hezbollah Hezbollah senior commander Shuker, who was killed nearly 2 weeks ago at this point. But since then, we're just in this psychological waiting game, and that's all part of the perspective, even from Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah. He says that this waiting game and the psychological toll that it's putting on residents of Haifa, of Kiryat Shmona, of all of these border towns across northern Israel on the border with Lebanon, the psychological toll that it's taking is all part of the warfare as well. But in the meantime, as you mentioned, these past couple of days have seen a relative calm, if we can say that, really in line with what we've seen for the past 10 months here. There are still drones flying into Israel. We saw red alerts sirening throughout the day. The IDF shooting down 2 of those drones, one of them while it was still in Lebanese territory, another one when it did pass into Israeli territory. They were able to shoot it down, though, before it made impact in Israel. But this is the daily tit-for-tat border attacks that we're really seeing between northern Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon at this point.
Okay, Nicole, thank you very much. Nicole Zedek up there in Kiryat Shmona on the border with Lebanon. Well, let's get more now with David Daoud. He's a Hezbollah and Lebanon Senior Fellow at the FDD, the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. Thank you for being with us, David. And I want to start out with the reports that we were actually hearing about yesterday, that Hezbollah was moving out of the Dahia neighbourhood of Beirut, which is its stronghold and its headquarters. Have you seen any more evidence of that? And what do you think that means?
Thank you for having me on. Look, I think you want to protect critical assets at any time where there's a risk of escalation with Israel. Now, is this a massive flight? I don't think so, but I think there would be a move to protect critical assets. I don't know that necessarily Hezbollah has taken the decision yet on what form its response will take. I think ideally for them, this would happen as part of massive Iranian retaliation, where their response would be blended in. But in any case, there is a risk of escalation. They don't want to leave that exposed to Israeli retaliation in Dahia or elsewhere.
And we've been analysing the recent comments out of Tehran, with that official saying, that they could be deterred if there is some kind of ceasefire deal later in the week. So they're linking it to what's happening in Gaza. And that, of course, has been Hezbollah's position from the start. Any sign that they, too, are trying to tone down the rhetoric at all?
From Hezbollah, look, their rhetoric has been relatively placid since Shuker's assassination. They've said, and Hassan Nasrallah has said this, that they will retaliate and the battlefield will speak. But he said in his last speech, I'm speaking very rationally to demonstrate that the resistance's leadership is taking all things into consideration. He has also said in his recent speeches, just like the Iranians, that the priority is, and it remains, the ceasefire deal in Gaza. I think that for them, it's not just the solution for Gaza, which saves their allies, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and others from potential destruction at Israeli hands. It also allows the pressure that Hezbollah is experiencing from the war of attrition that they opened with Israel to cease. They didn't expect this to last this long, and they don't want to do anything that would prolong their own pain, let alone maximize the chances of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad's defeat.
Do you have any hope that the US envoy Amos Hochstein, who's due to arrive here in a few hours, will be able to calm the situation? And what is the message he'll be taking to Beirut?
It depends on what you mean by calm the situation. I think Mr. Hochstein's efforts have been focused from the outset on effectively buying quiet for quiet's sake, and what would effectively amount to kicking the bucket down the road. The solutions for even a ceasefire on the north, which he seems to have given up on, would not buy a permanent resolution for either Israel or Lebanon to the solution that Hezbollah poses along the border. It would simply buy quiet, quiet that was akin to the quiet that existed on the southern border on October 6th, the deceptive quiet. If he is able to have any mitigating impact during his visit in Lebanon, it might be to delay or kind of tamp down Hezbollah's response, but it won't be to end the war of attrition that is continuing to rage in the north.
What are the various long-term proposals on the table for dealing with Hezbollah if, that is, it doesn't spiral into an all-out conflict? Now I know the Americans and also the French have some ideas of how to deal with this going forward.
Look, we have the international legal benchmark set by the Security Council in 2006. That's Resolution 1701, which requires that Hezbollah be distanced from the border and that UNIFIL and the Lebanese armed forces be the only armed entities in that region, and that this distancing from the border north of the Litani would be a preliminary step to Hezbollah's total disarmament in Lebanon. This is a good benchmark. but it's not realistic that Lebanon will ever fulfill it. Lebanon simply doesn't have the capability or the willingness to act against Hezbollah. We've seen that over 18 years. The ceasefire proposals that have been put together by the French and the Americans in the past 10 months don't even aspire to do that. I mean, there is an aspirational commitment to Resolution 1701 in the long term, but they propose to distance Hezbollah some mere meters from the border, or some mere kilometers rather from the border. Amos Hochstein's latest proposal that I've read would have a freezing in place, meaning the Hezbollah fighters that have left would stay where they are, and those that remain. The problem is there's no guarantee mechanism. Even if you distance them all, even if Hezbollah decides to temporarily withdraw north of Litani, the reliance will be on Lebanese armed forces and UNIFIL to maintain that area as free of Hezbollah's arms. And they simply don't have the capability or the willingness. So we will end up in the same situation again in a matter of years if we're lucky.
David, thank you very much. David Dowd there at the FDD.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has told Mahmoud Abbas that the Russian people feel pain at the plight of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian Authority president is visiting Putin in Moscow, which is trying to pose as a mediator in the conflict, all the while deepening ties with Hamas's patrons in Tehran. The US has warned Iran not to deliver ballistic missiles to Russia for its war in Ukraine. More in this report.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has arrived in Russia.
Abbas landed in Moscow on Monday evening for an official visit before he's set to continue to Turkey on Wednesday. Russian President Vladimir Putin welcomed Abbas, and the two discussed the increasingly dangerous situation in the Middle East.
Our position remains unchanged here. It was formulated a long time ago and does not depend on outside circumstances. We believe that in order to ensure long-standing, reliable, stable peace in the region, it is necessary to fulfill all the decisions of the United Nations, and first of all, to create a full-fledged Palestinian state.
Because of the United States, its stance and pressure, the United Nations failed its mission to make one decision, accept one resolution that would ensure the right of the people of Palestine for their own state.
Russia's ties to the Palestinians and the Iranians have been strengthened even further in recent months. Russia and Iran have long had a close defense relationship, but with the war in Ukraine and the escalating tensions in the Middle East, the military cooperation has expanded.
We are deeply concerned by reports that Iran is planning to deliver hundreds of ballistic missiles to Russia, and we continue to communicate with our European partners and allies regarding potential measures we may take. We've been warning of the deepening security partnership between Russia and Iran since the onset of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This partnership threatens European security and illustrates how Iran's destabilizing influence reaches beyond the Middle East and around the world.
Earlier this month, Iran's newly instated president Masoud Pezeshkian said that further expanding relations with Russia, a strategic partner, was a foreign policy priority. The world is currently bracing for an Iranian attack on Israel in response to the killing of Hamas terror chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran late last month. Russia condemned the assassination, widely blamed on Israel, and sent a convoluted message.
It is clear that the organizers of this political assassination were aware of the dangerous consequences of this action for the entire region.
While tensions are growing in the Middle East, so is the gap between the Western world on one side, supporting Israel and Ukraine, and Russia and China on the other, supporting Iran, its proxies, and the Arab nations.
Together, we are prepared to deliver a swift and severe response if Iran were to move forward with the transfer of ballistic missiles.
And Dan Perry, formerly of the Associated Press, is with me in the studio. And as you know, Dan, there is a great deal of hope that Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority might be the ones to ride into Gaza and save the day and manage a new moderate Palestinian state eventually.
Yeah. Now, look, the hope is that the PA, as the only brand that exists in Palestinian politics, along with Fatah that dominates it, other than Hamas, would take over instead of Hamas, which is a classic case of the less bad option paradigm. It is dispiriting to see the government in Israel, through various channels and spokespersons, trying to equate the PA to Hamas just because the PA does bad things, which they do. The PA also does very good things, like security cooperation with Israel and the West Bank, which Hamas does not. I mean, that is somewhere between infantile and anti-strategic to make that case, but they make it, which is just one reason why the government of Israel stands under great suspicion of trying to prolong the war by rejecting the only possible way out. Now, I say the PA, yeah, as a brand, but Mahmoud Abbas as a brand specifically is very, very distressed. He has avoided elections for close to 2 decades. He is a spent force in Palestinian politics. The more likely scenario for the PA is if, in the context of a hostage for prisoners and end of the war deal, Israel releases Marwan Barghouti. He's from Fatah, but Hamas would have sprung him. It's extremely likely that Barghouti would emerge.
You think he might be on the list of prisoners who are released?
By all reports say that he's number 2 on the list, and many,
he is serving multiple life sentences.
Yeah, I believe 5 counts of murder. But before he got himself implicated in the second Intifada, in what I have to say, horrible, the 5 murders, but the Intifada was about
suicide bombings, right?
I don't think it was suicide bombings; it was shootings. So he was a small player in this horrible thing called the Second Intifada. He was a big player in a peace process that preceded it. And many people in Israel who were just dealing with a horrible situation and understand the less bad option paradigm kind of see Marwan Barghouti having earned his street cred as a terrorist. Sad to say that this is how it works. Sometimes on the Palestinian side, would have credibility to do a deal with Israel on terms that are plausible, which Abbas didn't. Abbas was offered a reasonable, plausible deal by Olmert in 2008-9, and he failed to engage, like Arafat, almost a decade before. Barghouti maybe could do better. So it's interesting that Barghouti could be sprung by Hamas, end up leading the PA instead of Mahmoud Abbas, and that offers some hope to Israelis. It's a reflection of how crazy is the situation that a convicted murderer who doesn't really deny his guilt is in a position of being a beacon of hope.
And he consistently ranks as the most popular potential.
Every poll show he'd clean up because he would have the support both of Hamas and of Fatah, probably. So it's interesting. I don't think Abbas is going to be the savior, but the PA probably is the brand that would enable a day after in Gaza.
Okay, Dan. Thank you very much, Dan Perry there. Well, what role for Turkey in the current crisis? Well, the US ambassador to Turkey says the US is calling on Ankara to use its influence with Tehran to try and get it to scrap any plans to attack Israel. President Erdogan has embraced Hamas and used increasingly belligerent rhetoric against Israel, even threatening to invade the country last month. We're joining us now. Dr. Sinan Sidi is a senior fellow on Turkey at the FDD. Thank you very much for being with us, Sinan. So does Turkey have much influence with Tehran, and is it using that influence to try and calm the tensions?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I would hesitate to say that Turkey has strong influence over anything related to the ongoing crisis as we see it unfolding. What we're actually seeing, what Turkey's main motivation seems to be, is actually raising its voice to be noticed. And per your introduction, I would say that's also the reason why Erdogan sort of last week or 10 days before actually used those words to enter Israel at night quietly, or what many interpreted to be to invade Israel. Turkey doesn't seem to have a lot of influence over many of sort of regional actors' sort of motivations. Turkey's not involved in the hostage negotiations. It's more about raising its voice to try and get noticed. When in fact it really is playing an infinitesimally small, if any, role at all in this ongoing crisis.
Meanwhile, relations between Turkey and the US are not great right now, but it does look as though the US is making good on its pledge to sell Turkey dozens of F-16 fighter jets. We had some comments from the Turkish defense minister on that yesterday. Is that related at all to the current tensions?
Look, the US is in a strange position. This administration in the last 4 years has really struggled to sort of manage Turkey, or work with Turkey, I should say, on any level. And that's also predicated upon previous administrations dating back as far as 2010, when they really don't know how to deal with Turkey. Because on the one hand, you've got Turkey, a NATO ally, right, and a former ally of Israel, right, which is the only country inside of NATO as well as the European Union that not only it disagrees with how Israel is approaching Gaza, for example, but it's fundamentally the only enabler of Hamas, right? It provides it material support. With the Israeli authorities keep seizing weapons shipments and whatnot. And that's a problem as a NATO ally. So the United States is, on the one hand, aware of such things, but on the other hand, it's spending a considerable amount of energies not to actually sort of distance further its relationship with Turkey. So Turkey proved to be useful and instrumental in the recent prisoner exchange between Russia and the United States, which was part of one of the nations that was part of the consortium that helped settle that issue. So it's stuck between a rock and a hard place. Now, yes, and that's one of the reasons why Turkey's pressing ahead with the F-16 purchase and the U.S. willingness to sell it, because that was part of the deal, that if Turkey removed its objections to Sweden's inclusion into an expanded NATO, then the U.S. would proceed with the sale. So we shall have to see.
And what about reports, Sinan, that Erdogan is also seeking to repair ties with another enemy of Israel's, the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad? How might that tip the balance in the region?
Well, that's an unknown. So you're quite, the actual ongoings of that, what's actually happening inside those negotiations, is your guess is as good as mine. We understand that they are going to meet sometime, and likely in Moscow, basically because the Russians have been pushing at this. So it very much depends what that looks like and what kind of compromise and settlement they reach. But one of the things that we worry about, obviously, is if there is an increased sort of conflict between Israel and, for example, let's just say it's confined to conflict with Hezbollah in Lebanon, to what extent will Syria be co-opted into that sort of conflict as a means to supply Hezbollah forces? And what will Turkey's response be to that if they should reach some sort of negotiated settlement with the Syrian regime? It's all an unknown, but at the very minimum, it's very worrying.
It certainly throws up some concerns, doesn't it, Sinan? Thank you very much, Dr. Sinan Sidi there at the FDD. We're going to take a short break. Stay with us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Este excelente grupo de voluntarios, año tras año. ¡LGBT Dominicana!
Welcome back. Egypt, Jordan, Qatar and Saudi Arabia have condemned Israel's hardline minister Itamar Ben-Gvir after he led a group of Jews to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Today is Tisha B'Av in the Jewish calendar, when Jews mourn the destruction of the two temples. Well, Ben-Gvir led the group in prayer, which is forbidden in the compound under the current agreement with Jordan. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran has this report.
Dozens of Jewish worshippers openly prayed and bowed in the Temple Mount on Tuesday, blatantly defying the sensitive status quo procedures for the Flashpoint site. They received support from Israel's national security minister and another minister, both visiting the site to mark Tisha B'Av, the day of mourning over the destruction of the two ancient Jewish temples that stood at the site.
We are on Tisha B'Av, the Temple Mount. We have come here to commemorate the destruction of the temple. It should be said honestly that there is very, very great progress here in the governance, in sovereignty, in images of Jews praying. Our policy is to allow prayer, but I also say one more thing. We must win this war. We must win, not go to summits in Doha or Cairo, but to defeat them, to bring them down to their knees. This is the message. We can defeat Hamas and bring them down to their knees.
Considered the holiest site in Judaism and the third holiest site for Muslims, the Temple Mount and Al-Aqsa Mosque compound is governed by a vague, unwritten status quo. Under these agreements, non-Muslims may visit the site in the heart of Jerusalem's Old City, but are not allowed to pray. However, these limitations have been increasingly eroded in recent years. So before visits by Jews, they receive special instructions from the police, under the responsibility of Minister Ben-Gvir.
We ask that you adhere to the instructions of the police. Religious worship of any kind is prohibited on the Temple Mount, including the entry of holy utensils. Singing, protesting, or clapping are not allowed.
Jordan and Egypt slammed Ben-Gvir's visit, calling it an irresponsible provocation. It was also condemned by Israeli politicians, secular and orthodox, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying through his office that there is, quote, no change to Temple Mount status quo and that Ben-Gvir has no private policy. In response, Ben-Gvir doubled down and issued a defiant statement, claiming his policy is to enable freedom of worship for Jews at all places, including the Temple Mount, and that Jews will continue to do so in the future as well. Palestinians consider such acts as a provocation aimed at taking over the site. In fact, there is no other issue more effective in incitement campaigns by Palestinian terror groups. And despite Israel being at war, its national security minister continues to challenge the fragile status quo, and not just on the Temple Mount.
Well, here with me in the studio to talk about that, Dan Perry, author of Ask Questions Later and formerly of the Associated Press. So Dan, Ben-Gvir there, once again living up to his reputation as something of an arsonist, a fire starter in the region. The serious question, though, this has been condemned by several Arab countries, as I mentioned. Could it possibly upend the hostage talks that are due to happen on Thursday?
I don't think it will. And one of the reasons is that Netanyahu was so quick in condemning it and making clear that this involves not a change in Israel's policies, but the action of one, rather extremist minister who's trying to rattle the saber to make an internal political point. So I'm sure that the Egyptians and others in the region are mature enough to get this. Whether enough such provocations couldn't incite protests and other and even rioting among Palestinians or who knows, even Israeli Arabs if it goes far enough, I cannot say, and that is a danger. But I think in the current context, this is survivable. Ben-Gvir, however, clearly is a pyromaniac, and he stands for something. And the thing he stands for is to avoid a ceasefire in Gaza, to continue the war while knowing that this means a sacrifice of all the remaining hostages.
Right, he has made it clear what he thinks about the hostage deal or any potential hostage deal. I'm just wondering, how is he doing in the polls since the war began? Because I know the other far-right member of the government, Bezalel Smotrich, has gone down significantly in the polls. What about Ben-Gvir? Does he still have some support?
They ran on a joint list and got, I believe, about 1/10 of the vote. And I think however it works out between them, they would still get 1/10 of the vote. Maybe even a bit more, because that's what Likud is bleeding seats to the extreme right and also to the center. So Ben-Gvir finds political profit in acting this way, Smotrich, his mini-me at this point, at least is quite open about the fact that he feels indifference for the lives of the hostages. Ben-Gvir still tries to somehow have it both ways, but the two of them really stand for that idea, sacrificing the hostages in order to fight on in Gaza.
Do you think they will be a long-term fixture of Israeli politics then, going forward?
Yeah, I think Israeli politics is coalescing towards a large center that includes parts of the post-Netanyahu Likud. Not that much is left there that could be center, but whatever there is, there will be a center, a left, and a far right that basically speaks in the voice of Ben-Gvir.
Okay, Dan, thank you very much. Well, night is falling on Jerusalem as we come to the end of Tisha B'Av, a day of mourning in the Jewish calendar when Jews commemorate the destruction of the two temples in Jerusalem. Our Balich Sladin is there for us now. And Balich, we saw many people coming out to pray at the Kotel, the Western Wall last night. What is happening tonight?
Yes, let's quickly take a look at what's happening here at the Kotel, the Western Wall, as we see thousands of people are here praying in front of the wall. I guess like more are coming at the coming hour as well because of the end of the this sacred day, Tisha B'Av, this morning, the day that commemorates the destruction of the temples in Jerusalem, where the incident today happened, and Ben-Gvir entered with 2,000 that prayed in there and challenged the status quo, as you were talking. But as we see that even that some people that I talked to has expressed their fears because of the attack that is anticipated from Iran and from Lebanon as well. But although that there is some fear and the situation is tense, but again, thousands of people, as we've seen, are here praying. And I should mention that also there are some families of the hostages here and families of fallen soldiers that joined the worshippers in order to pray for, first of all, unity in these times in the Israeli society, but also, of course, the return of the hostages as soon as possible. The Forum of the Families of the Hostages today even has condemned the statements that Ben-Gvir has made in the Temple Mount, and said that he jeopardizes the talks in order to bring back the hostages. So we see that the families of the hostages are present everywhere. They want to raise awareness for their cause, of course, the cause that many or all of the Israelis are, of course, find very, very important. And especially in this day, the families of the hostages and families of fallen soldiers are here present with the worshippers in order to call for the return of the hostages, for unity in the Israeli society, although that we see that it's not exactly the situation. Unity is very hard to find in these times in Israel, even there are disagreements between Ben-Gvir and the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. We see protests everywhere, but at least for this day, they are calling for unity.
Yep, a particularly poignant Tisha B'Av this year. Balich, thank you very much indeed. Balich Sladin there in Jerusalem. Now, you won't find him at any of the big demonstrations, but Nir Kaftori is one of the prominent activists calling for the return of the hostages. Everything he does alone. He goes out into the streets alone. He stands alone at an intersection or a street, and he remains silent. Silent for them, for the 115 men, women and children who've been crying out for help from Gaza for 10 months now. This report by Mir Yona from our Hebrew language channel.
Someone stopped next to me and asked me how I feel. Suddenly I don't see. I hear the sound of crying. So I lift the blindfold and I see a man sitting in a car, crying and crying. And he couldn't. I'm virtually crying now. He wasn't able to hold back his tears.
You might be surprised the influence one individual person can make. One person who decides to take a brave step which defies all possible logic.
I was looking for something on a personal level because I don't want to start organizing here, not demonstrating, not signs, not people. I get up in the morning. This is my weapon, yeah? A blindfold, another cloth to tie my hands behind my back, and I go alone and sit down. That's all.
In the heavy summer heat, in the middle of a busy intersection, Nir Kaftori sits for hours, barefoot, eyes blindfolded and hands bound. no placard, no megaphone, using his body to convey a message for the hostages.
I don't show anything of what they are going through, but at least the physical, external element, the one where they sit bound and they see what's going on around them, not always because they are blindfolded, but because maybe they sit in the dark. So yeah, I bring a little of what those who pass by and see me.
He doesn't go to the big protests, doesn't shout slogans. He's not interested in being labeled left-wing or right-wing. He just sits alone, quietly, under conditions that may resemble, even if only slightly, the harsh conditions of the abductees in Gaza.
I have no political message here. I don't have any sign with me. I don't shout any slogans. I sit as I imagine some 20-year-old soldier has been sitting for 10 months in a Hamas tunnel.
Do you feel like the protests have lost their impact?
The protests? Look, it keeps up some kind of momentum. There's a protest, but I don't see what kind of impact it makes. I don't see it influencing anything. It even enhances the gaps. This divides the existing in our nation today. And that's why I try to find a corner that I can enter in the middle and split and come and present the human side. I am a human being.
Neil draws many reactions. Car honks that signal support. People come out to hug and help. But there are also negative reactions.
Sometimes someone drives by on a scooter and curses me. Why would someone who sees a human tied up in the middle of an intersection, not expressing any political position, why would they curse me?
Neil's protest has gained traction, and more people have joined the silent struggle, standing at intersections in the hope of having an impact.
Nir has touched something very significant, which is the individual's ability to make a difference. There's no need for a huge protest of millions. You don't need difficult activities. Just the silence of one person sitting can change things in the world.
The helplessness, the fear, and the uncertainty, delivered in a chilling manner. The public cannot remain indifferent. In our day-to-day life, we're time takes its course. You move on and you're there. I really recommend it to everyone. Take an hour somewhere, sit down, put on a blindfold, and stop your life for an hour and understand for a second what is happening here. In a reality where life goes on and people go through another routine day, Neil is here to remind us all that they are still there, bound and helpless for over 10 months.
There are thoughts that pass. You need to know to control them. What are you doing for 2 or 3 hours without talking, without seeing, without anything? Even this part is hard. Plus sitting in the heat and the sweat. I wouldn't call it hard, but it's not easy. It's challenging.
The United Nations has condemned the Houthis in Yemen after they stormed the UN Human Rights Office in the capital Sana'a. It's the latest crackdown by the Iranian-backed group on people working with international aid agencies. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran is here with me in the studio now. And Ariel, the Houthis have been relatively quiet, I think it's fair to say, since Israel hit the port of Hodeidah pretty hard in response to that drone attack on Tel Aviv. But we can see that inside the country, the crackdown on any kind of international aid agency continues.
Well, they have been quiet in regards with Israel, despite war rhetoric, but they have been carrying out attacks almost regularly in the Red Sea in the interim. But yes, we're talking about a very unusual and concerning crackdown on UN offices. I mean, that's as plainly as we can describe it. Basically, on the 3rd of August, the Houthis stormed the UN human rights offices in Sana'a. This is according to a statement by the UN human rights chief, Volker Turk, today. Now, why did they storm? Because, or at the time, just before they stormed the offices, the UN was holding negotiations with the Houthis for them to release about 60 aid workers, including 6 UN workers that they had taken captive back in June. And so as these negotiations were taking place in Sana'a, the Houthis brought more guys to storm the offices. A very concerning development for the UN, as I said, with more than 60 people working for the UN and other NGOs being detained. Obviously, this reflects a blatant lack of respect and perception of authority of the UN that is there to help Yemen, which is considered by the UN, if not the most, one of the most dire humanitarian situations in the world, not just the Middle East, with about 70% of the population there reliant on international aid on a daily basis. Now, the UN is acknowledging a lot about what's going on with its offices in Yemen. As for what Hamas is doing to its offices in the Gaza Strip, with the idea of finding a military drone and the desk of the chief of UN in the Gaza Strip, I think this discrepancy raises other issues. But as far as the situation in Yemen, it is not a good time to be an aid worker these days there.
Right, absolutely. And as you say, the people there desperately need foreign aid. The Israeli strike on Hodeidah port was one of the ports that takes in a lot of aid, of course.
Aid, fuel tanks.
Exactly, all kinds of resources. I mean, Yemen was the poorest Arab country even before the war began. So we can see how devastating the situation is there. That misery has been compounded of late by very heavy flooding. I think we've got an update on how many people lost their lives in that. Yeah,
flooding over the past few days from heavy rain has brought the death toll there to past 60 in Yemen. Now, these are areas that are mainly under Houthi control. Almost all the provinces that have been struck are under Houthi control. We're talking about 34,000 families that have been affected by this, with thousands displaced. The UN warns that the situation could exacerbate, and opposition media is really accusing the Houthis for remaining silent amidst this crisis. And it further illustrates how the international community has pretty much forsaken the Yemeni people to the control of the Houthis, and we see that they prioritize storming UN offices rather than helping their own people, or at least commenting on what's going on in areas that are completely under their control.
All right, Ariel, thank you. And Dan Perry, this is a classic example of what Iran does. It moves into a country that already has an ongoing conflict. It uses that conflict to turn people against each other and use the country for its own aims. And we can see that happening now in Yemen, can't we?
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was about to burst in and make my additions here. The Houthis are a disgrace and a blight, and it's fair to say a cancer upon the people of Yemen and the world. A cancer because they stand for death, not only in their slogans on their flags, but in the fact that in their actions that they would attack UN offices that are there to help ease the humanitarian crisis of their own people is just ridiculous. It's like a cartoon figure that the world has put up with this. These actions that are being instigated, backed, funded, and armed by Iran is a fundamental part of the problem. And I think what I want to talk about for a second is moral clarity, okay? We get ourselves involved a little too much in the calculus of who's winning and who lost, and will this deal or that deal constitute an achieving of all the aims. I think Israel would be wise to indeed bite the bullet, and after 10 months of trying, almost 11, end the war and take back the hostages and save their lives, and then figure out what can be done about this entire edifice of ridiculousness that has been erected against it, which amounts to Iran and all its proxies, including Hamas, which is more than an Iranian proxy. It's a reflection of the Palestinian problem that Israel faces. So I think you have two instances, two lessons here. And, you know, the average pro-Israeli partisan is going to like one more than the other. One is that at the end of the day, Israel has to have a wiser policy with the Palestinians. Figure out some way to pacify those it can pacify, separate from them, and do something differently, because this has not worked out well. The other is that the Islamic Republic of Iran really can't be tolerated anymore. What they have done, as reflected most clearly in the case of the Houthis, who've been allowed to get away with impeding much of global maritime trade, is unacceptable. It's not an Israeli problem. It's not even a regional problem. The Islamic Republic of Iran, the theocracy that was installed through a fake referendum in April 1979, is an implacable enemy primarily of the Iranian people. And the world would be doing them a favor if it took action to isolate and ultimately topple them. And I do believe that they know they are vulnerable because they are so reviled. And that may be what is somewhat staying their hand from necessarily sparking a complete regional war, which might not work out so well for them.
All right, Dan, I think that's a great note to end on. Dan Perry, thank you very much indeed. Ariel, thanks to you as well. Now, as if tensions across the region were not high enough, late last night, an earthquake was felt in Lebanon and Israel, and also in Syria, almost exactly where a very strong quake caused devastation back in 2022. People there were left very frightened about what was happening. Well, Dr. Itai Korzon is a seismologist at the Geological Survey of Israel. Thank you very much for being with us. So, relatively speaking, this was quite a minor quake, wasn't it? I think 4.8 magnitude. But it certainly was a reminder that despite all the conflict going on in the region, we all share this threat, don't we?
Yeah, that's a regional threat, and it's a moderate earthquake. I won't call it a minor one. It's something that you feel very strong. It might crack houses. I think there were several tens of people injured in Syria from what I read. And it was a 5.1, 5.2, depends who you ask. And it wasn't only one, there were several earthquakes. There were like around 5 earthquakes last night, beginning with the magnitude 4 at 9:30 at night, and then several earthquakes, which the biggest one was a 5.2 at 12 o'clock at night.
It's because there were a series of different earthquakes. I understood that they had downgraded the strength from 5.1 to 4.8.
I wouldn't do that.
No, you would put it as a moderate earthquake. All right. Well,
in any case, there were several people felt it very strong. You could see from the pictures, from the movies. It's something you feel. We had one like that in Israel, 5.2 in 2004, in the northern Dead Sea. It was felt very strong all around Israel, and there were some damages, mainly structures.
And of course, the issue with earthquakes is it depends on how well prepared towns and cities are to deal with them. Of course, I mentioned the 2022 earthquake, which caused widespread death and devastation in Turkey and Syria. What precautions have been taken since then?
In Israel, question?
Across the region, in Turkey as well. If you.
I'm not sure about what's the precautions that were made in Syria and in Turkey. I know that Turkey does have a very high understanding of the threat of earthquakes, and very strong facilities and infrastructures for study and engineering for that. And they really experienced a very strong earthquake. A 7.8 it's a very strong earthquake. But yes, the biggest thing is infrastructure, and even also in Israel, we're not really prepared for a very strong earthquake in the sense of infrastructure. There are places which the structures are engineered better, but there are many towns all around Israel, especially along the Dead Sea Fault, in the eastern side of Israel, which we know that. Houses are not strengthened enough for large earthquakes, and that's probably the biggest investment for governments to really put a lot of money into that.
All right, Dr. Itai Korzon, thank you very much.
Very well.
And finally, the Israeli pop star Noah Kirel is seeking to take her unique sound global. Our Sivan Sisay has this report.
With the flag. Praying for better days. Amen. Let's do it. Am Yisrael Chai.
Last weekend, singer Noah Kirel came to the summit event of the Israel Campus Coalition organization in Washington, D.C., and put Zionism on display.
Can I have the flag for a second? I just have to. Wait. I just want to say that these days, more than ever, we need to be proud to be Israeli, proud to be Jewish. And it really means a lot to me to be here today to represent my country. And the next song has so much power, the power of the unicorn.
The performance took place in front of thousands of students. Jews from campuses all over the U.S. In times when the campuses are saturated with pro-Palestinian demonstrations and Israel hatred, such pictures are especially moving. These days, the singer is preparing for her 4th performance in Tel Aviv's Hayarkon Park in September. She will be the first singer and the youngest to achieve this.
I'm going to give my 1,000,000% until the last drop of sweat. Work the hardest I can to make it a truly unforgettable show. It feels real to me already, like a tradition in Hayarkon Park, something I give my audience every year. And precisely at a time like this, it's something I want to continue giving and show that we are not retreating, but continuing to advance.
In recent months, Noah experienced quite a few hardships. Her cousin Yuri Yaish was murdered in February in a shooting attack. Kira was also accused of copying her last song, I, from a song by Meghan Trainor called Me Too from 2016. Still, Noah, being Noah, overcame these obstacles and continues to prove that she is one of the best singers in Israel, who is now also conquering hearts in the USA.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. Do stay with us on I24 News. Khaled Ben-David is up next with the rundown. Good night.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Tel Aviv area residents shaken by the boom of a rocket falling to the sea, the first fired at the city from Gaza since May. We'll have the story. Iran rejects a call by Western nations to stand down from its promised attack on Israel as the region nervously waits to see if the Tehran regime and its proxies follow through on its threats. We'll have the latest. On a day Jews mourn the destruction of ancient Jerusalem's holy temples, Israel's far-right minister Itamar Ben-Gvir defies government policy on religious worship at the Temple Mount holy site. We'll explain how. This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben-David. As Israelis nervously await an expected missile attack from Iran and its proxies, residents of the Tel Aviv metropolitan area were shaken this afternoon by the boom of a rocket in the skies above them. But this rocket, which landed in the sea off the beach of Jaffa, just outside the studio, was fired by Hamas from Gaza, and it's the first projectile launched from there towards Tel Aviv since May. A second rocket launched from Hamas towards Tel Aviv misfired and landed in Gaza. Now, the terror group, which released a video showing their launching of the rocket, said the fire was, quote, in response to the Zionist massacre of civilians and the displacement of our people. Joining us in studio, our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseron, and our reporter, Zach Anders. And Ariel, this rocket, I think what most surprised people is that Hamas showing it still does have the capability of launching rockets to Tel Aviv, even if in this case, certainly, they did not cause any harm or damage.
Look, if Hamas could launch rockets at Tel Aviv once a week, once every 2 weeks, they would. But they're spacing out their rocket launches towards the Tel Aviv area because they expect this war to drag out. From day one, they've spaced out their launches in a way that if the war were to take 1 year or 1 decade, they would still be able to maintain the capability to launch rockets at Tel Aviv until the last day of the war, whenever that is. And I just want to note one more thing. In the video, prior to the launches, you see the preparations of the Hamas militants, and you can see all of them in civilian clothing. And I think that is one thing that needs to, the international community needs to be aware of, that it's these kinds of acts, this way of operating is a way to mislead the international community and its differentiation between civilians and combatants. Here you have at least 5-6 guys all in civilian clothing, but they're clearly engaged. They're clearly Al-Qassam Brigade's militants, and they're all engaged in terror activity against Israel.
All right, well, we spoke to some of the people in the area that actually saw the rocket land. Let's take a look at that.
We were at our apartment. I live right in front of the beach, and I saw something in the sky, and I also saw the impact directly on the sea. It was, and then we heard a boom. It was very spectacular, and we were not expecting this at this time. We were very scared. And we were also very, it was very weird that we didn't hear the Azaka. And then we went into the apartment and we were waiting to see what happens, but it's very scary.
Now, of course, it is not concerns over an attack from Gaza that has Israel and the region on edge this week, but the prospect of a major air assault from Iran and its proxies. With reports that Iran has now prepared missiles and drones for the attack, the U.S. and U.K. are trying to prevent an escalation that could explode into a full-scale regional war. The IDF says it's prepared for the attack, which many expect as soon as the next few days. Senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has more.
The 9th of the Hebrew months of Av, the anniversary of the destruction of the biblical temples, has arrived, and still no sign of an Iranian attack, despite some predictions. Yet Israel remains vigilant.
We are determined to fulfill our mission. We need to return the residents safely to their homes after we cause Hezbollah to withdraw north of the Litani River. I am aware of the tensions and the great burden placed on the citizens of Israel. We are following the developments in Beirut, in Tehran, and in other places.
Trying to de-escalate the situation, the leaders of the United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Italy released this Monday a joint statement pushing for negotiations on a Gaza ceasefire and declaring support for Israel in case of an Iranian attack. What was supposed to create an impasse for Iran was received with anger in Tehran. The Iranian Foreign Ministry said that the statement, quote, lacks political logic, contradict principles of international law, and that Iran will not be bullied into submission. But some Iranian sources say the country will only attack if the Gaza truce talks fail, or it perceives that Israel is stalling the negotiations. In preparation, the U.S. has ordered the deployment of a guided missile submarine to the Middle East, sending a message to Iran.
Share the same concerns and expectations that our Israeli counterparts have with respect to potential timing here. Could be this week. It is difficult to ascertain at this particular time if there is an attack by Iran and or its proxies, what that could look like. But we have to be prepared for what could be a significant set of attacks.
While the United States is prepared for a response, President Joe Biden seemed to remain calm about the situation, a feeling shared by many in Israeli society.
We are not afraid. There is a stress in the air, but we're in the beach and we feel good.
Well, for more, let's go to our correspondent, Nicole Tzedek. She's in northern Israel there. Nicole, there were some red alerts this morning, but since then, relatively quiet. But of course, that area where you're in is really where many expect, if there is an attack, will be the most vulnerable, not to those rockets from Iran, but those coming from just over the Lebanon border from Hezbollah.
That's exactly right, Kalev, and that remains one of the main fears, and that's why so many of these cities along the Lebanese border have been evacuated for not only the past 2 weeks since Hezbollah has been claiming this massive retaliatory attack since the IDF eliminated that senior Hezbollah commander Shukar about 2 weeks ago. Since then, Hezbollah continues to say there will be a retaliation, but exactly when and what it will entail, that's exactly what Israel still doesn't quite know at this point, but is preparing for. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant visited one of the IDF's different intelligence bases up here in the north earlier today. He says that they are monitoring the different fronts, both Hezbollah in Lebanon and Iran as well. And he says that Israel is prepared on any and all fronts for when an attack might come. And in the meantime, the instructions from the Home Front Command for any of the residents up closer to the border, they do remain the same at this time. For those that are right up on the border that have been evacuated so far, they're obviously still being urged to clear out and remain away from the border. And for those that are a little bit further from the border that have yet to be evacuated, there's just being told to continue to listen to the instructions from the Home Front Command, as they could change at a moment's notice. But Kalev, this is also part of the warfare itself, the psychological toll and the psychological warfare. Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah has been stating that this waiting game that they're making Israel and the Israeli civilians play is also part of the war they're playing, because in the meantime, while everyone is anticipating attack, there is still that anxious feeling, even though we have had a relatively calm day today.
Right. And of course, now there's talk. Many thought it would be today, Tisha B'Av. There's now talk of it being maybe after this summit on Thursday, we'll see whether there'll be a hostage deal. The truth is, none of us know when this could come. And of course, that is part of the psychological strategy and advantage of Iran here.
Certainly, and I do want to note that U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein, he is in the region, both in Israel and Beirut as well, so he's trying to push a diplomatic effort, and that does indicate the fact that he's even coming to the region in more of a last-minute trip. That shows that the United States does believe that there is possibly some room for a diplomatic effort to quell the ever-brewing tensions, especially leading up to this so-called deadline that everyone keeps talking about those negotiations set for Thursday, August August 15th. So in the meantime, the United States is still pushing for some sort of a solution, and I think that is telling the fact that Hoxton is in the region, because if they were expecting something massive to explode at any moment, then it's not likely that he would be coming to the region at this time. So that is an indication that maybe there's room, but at the same time, the messaging that we're hearing from Hezbollah and from Iran itself says that there will be an attack, and that's why Israel is still bracing for it.
Right, and of course, reports of Secretary of State Anthony Blinken may be coming to the region, still leaving tomorrow for that Thursday meeting. We'll have to see about that. That's not confirmed, though. Nicole Sedek, thank you for that. And Zach, you spent a lot of time up north. Of course, Nicole, in that town, Kiryat Shmona, which has mostly been evacuated. There are a few scattered civilians, but you have to think of a town like Nahariya, which is just as close to the Lebanon border. You were in there, and of course, we saw what just one drone can do there, causing a fatality, and the threat of those, how vulnerable towns like that are.
Yeah, and you know, interesting video has come out. We haven't been able to confirm or verify it, but it shows similar landscape and what appears to be an Israeli helicopter, attack helicopter, targeting a drone. This is the landscape now that we've entered into with the air defense systems as they are. The use of fighter jets, now apparently attack helicopters, different means to try and shoot down, target these drones. You have to get the sense then that either this is practice, training, or employing new methods to try and combat the drone threat. The Iron Dome is an incredible, capable air defense system with rockets, missiles, mortars, things like that. It just, you get the sense 10 months on that this system was never built for or designed for these drones, because it's shown and demonstrated a really intense struggle with hitting some of these drone targets. I've tried for months to try and understand better why that is. I don't get any firm answers from anybody on the defense side as to what is, and they don't want to broadcast, right?
Right. I mean, there is talk of Israel developing this laser-based system that has been run tests on, but apparently not ready yet to be deployed, as far as we know. And of course, if you know, Hezbollah would launch hundreds of drones at once, it's hard to see any system that could be hermetically defend against that many. Some will have to sit
at the same time. This is the slower target, the larger target, and if you get a launch of that many, it's a give and take. If you see that many launches coming your way, you have more time to prepare than you do 100 rockets, 100 missiles.
Right. Now, of course, another city that could be in the firing line of an Iran attack is Haifa, the port city of Haifa, which sits just 30 kilometers from the Lebanon border. And the memories are still vivid there from the 2006 Second Lebanon War, when Hezbollah rockets were repeatedly slammed into the city, causing fatalities. Now, since October 7th, the municipality's emergency command center moved underground and now stands ready as these regional tensions soar, and nervous residents call in asking for information about the nearest bomb shelter. Donna Avni takes a closer look at how Haifa is preparing to perhaps once again come under attack.
In response to escalating regional tensions, the northern Israeli city of Haifa has moved its command center underground to a fortified bomb shelter. Since October 7th, when Hezbollah began lobbing missiles and drones at northern Israel, this facility has been operating around the clock, prepared for any crisis.
This is the main room. All the management of the city are coming over here from the beginning of an attack or any other emergency action. For us, the whole city is important. So even one of the missiles will, I don't know, it will miss the port. It will be inside the city. So we are dealing with the parts of the cities where citizens are living in.
The command center monitors all areas of Haifa, ensuring that even a single incident within the city is managed efficiently.
We are here from the beginning of the war, from the 7th of October, and it's working 24/7. And especially starting from the last 10 days.
Haifa's emergency preparedness extends beyond the command center to a network of public bomb shelters. These shelters are automatically activated during alarms and are equipped with essential amenities.
You can see here the number of the calls that we have from the beginning of the morning, 438 calls. The number is increasing these days. It's not the usual number, so more people are calling, more of them are asking about information. Most information is about finding bomb shelters.
Public shelters can accommodate up to 50 people and are equipped with air conditioning, generators, and Wi-Fi to ensure comfort and communication during emergencies. With this fully functioning command center, Haifa is ready to safeguard its population during these tense times.
Well, I was in Haifa during the Second Lebanon War, saw those rockets slam into the city, causing fatalities, and let's just hope, gentlemen, we don't see that again. We do have an update, Ariel, on this rocket attack from Gaza today that caused alarm here in Tel Aviv.
Indeed, and the IDF, not wasting time, issuing a call for the residents of the western and northern areas of Khan Yunis. This is the Bani Suhaila, as well as El Mahata neighborhood, issuing a call to immediately evacuate the area, given that the IDF is expecting to operate in the area forcefully and immediately, according to the statement by IDF spokesperson in Arabic, Avichai Edra'i. He shared an image on his X account with the different blocks and neighborhoods of the areas where the IDF is expected to operate, and calling on the residents of those areas to immediately evacuate. Obviously, this is what the IDF has been doing in recent weeks, where rocket launches have originated, going in there and operating in addition to other pinpoint operations based on specific intelligence.
All right. Well, this was to be expected, of course, after this incident this afternoon. Now, as we noted, Iran is coming under increasing international pressure to stand down on its threats to attack Israel. But Tehran is finding support from Russia, which in recent years has boosted its military cooperation with the Islamic Republic. Russian President Vladimir Putin, who still aims to be a major player here in the Mideast, met today in Moscow with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to discuss the rising tensions in the region. Our senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has more on that in this report.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has arrived in Russia. Abbas landed in Moscow on Monday evening for an official visit before he's set to continue to Turkey on Wednesday. Russian President Vladimir Putin welcomed Abbas, and the two discussed the increasingly dangerous situation in the Middle East.
Our position remains unchanged here. It was formulated a long time ago and does not depend on outside circumstances. We believe that in order to ensure long-standing, reliable, stable peace in the region, it is necessary to fulfill all the decisions of the United Nations, and first of all, to create a full-fledged Palestinian state.
Because of the United States, its stance and pressure, the United Nations failed its mission to make one decision, accept one resolution that would ensure the right of the people of Palestine for their own state.
Russia's ties to the Palestinians and the Iranians have been strengthened even further in recent months. Russia and Iran have long had a close defense relationship, but with the war in Ukraine and the escalating tensions in the Middle East, the military cooperation has expanded.
We are deeply concerned by reports that Iran is planning to deliver hundreds of ballistic missiles to Russia, and we continue to communicate with our European partners and allies regarding potential measures we may take. We've been warning of the deepening security partnership between Russia and Iran since the onset of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This partnership threatens European security and illustrates how Iran's destabilizing influence reaches beyond the Middle East and around the world.
Earlier this month, Iran's newly instated president Masoud Pezeshkian said that further expanding relations with Russia, a strategic partner, was a foreign policy priority. The world is currently bracing for an Iranian attack on Israel in response to the killing of Hamas terror chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran late last month. Russia condemned the assassination, widely blamed on Israel, and sent a convoluted message.
It is clear that the organizers of this political assassination were aware of the dangerous consequences of this action for the entire region.
While tensions are growing in the Middle East, so is the gap between the Western world on one side, supporting Israel and Ukraine, and Russia and China on the other, supporting Iran, its proxies, and the Arab nations.
Together, we are prepared to deliver a swift and severe response if Iran were to move forward with the transfer of ballistic missiles.
Zach, I think it's worth noting with all that's going on in Russia, which right now is trying to repel a Ukrainian attack on its own territory, President Putin made the time to meet with President Abbas, a reflection of how, invested Russia is in the Mideast now, and a lot of that has to do with that alliance with Iran.
Yeah, what I wouldn't give to be a fly on the wall listening to Putin describe the losses in Kursk right now. But the interesting element, I think, of what's happened on this Abbas visit is at the same time there's this military hardware forum they've done this for 10 years in Moscow. It's a military hardware convention. And Iran sent a huge delegation, and they're showing off their own equipment. So the timing, interesting. But as you're reading through Iran's statements about what's happening as they're in Moscow, with some brigadier generals and defense officials showing off some of the equipment, Ariel made a good point that half the stuff that Iran uses is Russian. That their defense industry, the two are very closely intertwined. But Iran today coming out and saying that they're showcasing their new air defense systems that can repel attacks. It's an interesting cabal, the two of them, how they've managed to be together and so close through the years. But I think for the Russian perspective, the Putin perspective, seeing Iran get hit hard in some sort of retaliatory response would not be in their interest. They like the situation as is. They want to buy these drones and missiles. They don't want Iran using these drones and missiles, especially if things continue to deteriorate on the Eastern Front in Ukraine.
Right, yes.
Yeah, I just want to note that if we're looking at where Russia places itself in this current crisis in the Middle East, I think it's best to look at what Syria is doing. They're perhaps the weakest link in this Iranian axis of proxies. They're not participating.
And that is really interesting that we haven't really, we're talking about not just the Hezbollah, not just the Houthis who are thousands of miles away, but even those Shiite militias in Iraq. But what's missing, somewhat notably, is really some concern over attacks from Syrian soil.
Indeed. A lot of people that you talk to today, they'll say that Syria today is basically Russia. And so if we try and gauge where Russia finds itself in this escalation, whether it wants it to exacerbate or not, it's best to look at what it's doing in Syria, or what Syria is doing in this escalation. Bashar al-Assad is absolutely quiet. Not a single word is being voiced in this whole thing, from the assassination of Hania in Tehran, from the assassination of Fuad Shukr of Hezbollah in Beirut. Assad is silent, and I think that is very telling as to his own interests, that he doesn't want to feel the wrath of Israel on Syrian territory, which he is on a nearly weekly basis, but it's also telling regarding what Russia wants to see in this current situation that's playing out, and the fact that Syria is on the sidelines on this so-called game. I think it indicates what Moscow wants,
especially
doesn't want to see.
Right, especially Russia, with its having a key naval and air force base in the region based in Syria. And it certainly doesn't want to see those assets involved in a wider war that could involve both Israel and even, of course, some of the Western
They probably
powers.
have a ground presence, too, by now, of either Wagner mercenaries or...
Of course.
in the hundreds, if not thousands.
Of course. And Russia doesn't want to see those endangered by an Iran-Israel conflict. All right, well, speaking of conflicts, let's move to a domestic political one here in Israel, but that certainly impacts on everything we've been talking about. And I'm referring to the growing tensions between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, primarily on the conduct of the war in Gaza, the prospects for a hostage deal, and other issues. Now, these differences are well known, but in recent days have moved beyond reports of just behind-the-door remarks into some open sniping between the two. And unfortunately, other countries in the region are taking notice of this. Zach Anders takes a closer look.
A prime minister pushing for total victory.
Israel will fight until we destroy Hamas's military capabilities, end its rule in Gaza, and bring all our hostages home. That's what total victory means, and we will settle for nothing less.
and a defense minister who calls that phrase nonsense. Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant are locked in a war of words at a critical time. Israeli news site Ynet reported Monday that Defense Minister Gallant told the Foreign Affairs Committee in a closed-door meeting at the Knesset that the Prime Minister's favorite slogan is, quote, nonsense. Instead of dismissing the anonymously sourced quote, the Prime Minister's office fired back with a statement Monday night. Quote, when Gallant adopts the anti-Israel narrative, he harms the chances of reaching a hostage deal, the statement read, and went on to say, quote, Israel has only one choice, to achieve total victory. This victory will be achieved. Across the Middle East, the news cycle is buzzing. Qatari-based Al Jazeera, which has been banned in Israel since May, reported on its Arabic site, quote, in a clear escalation of his rhetoric towards Netanyahu, Gallant said that Israel was the reason for the delay in reaching a deal to return the kidnapped soldiers. He added that talk of an absolute victory was complete nonsense. In the United States, the New York Times headline reads, Netanyahu slams Gallant for questioning the goal of total victory in Gaza. Gallant responded to the controversy by posting that incessant leaks from sensitive and confidential forums are a weakness in this war that must be dealt with severely.
And unfortunately, the problem, I think, is less leaks than simply the fact these two men are engaging in this at such a sensitive time, and you can see it in some of the regional reactions.
Israel's top two security officials, the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister, at odds in the most sensitive security period in Israel's history. That has not gone unnoticed in the Middle East, as Zach has shown, but really also in their analysis, trying to emphasize that Netanyahu and Gallant are at odds while the entire country of Israel braces for the Iranian response. The Prime Minister and its Defense Minister are in disagreements, public disagreement. This is not something that you're used to seeing in Arab countries at all, given their democratic nature of some of them. But that is what is really taking headlines right now, the disagreements, the lack of unity. And this is definitely what's being highlighted regarding Israel's internal situation amid this sensitive security situation.
And these headlines, I mean, you can go back and start seeing some of these headlines in October as well. This has been going on for months.
Right, and of course it goes back to the judicial issue, differences over the judicial reform. And again, you know, this kind of situation at this time is definitely not what Israel needs, not what Israel needs to project right now out in this region. Ariel Ostron, Zach Anders, stay with us. We are going out for a break. Lots more coming up, though, on The Rundown. We'll be right back.
Este excelente grupo de voluntarios, año tras año. LGBT Dominicana.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back to the Rundown on I-24 News. Now, as we have already noted, today was Tisha B'Av. That is the day that Jews mark as the anniversary of the destruction of the two holy temples of ancient Jerusalem. Now, the Temple Mount, which houses the El Aqsa Mosque, is still Judaism's holiest site, but most Orthodox religious authorities hold that Jews should not pray there till the temple is rebuilt. Now, that is also the policy of the Israeli government, which, since Israel regained the site in 1967, has banned Jewish prayer there to respect its status also as a Muslim holy site. But far-right Internal Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has been pushing the bounds of that policy over the past year, and today he went even further in upsetting the status quo over the site, despite the risk of adding to those regional tensions already running high. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has the details.
Dozens of Jewish worshippers openly prayed and bowed in the Temple Mount on Tuesday, blatantly defying the sensitive status quo procedures for the Flashpoint site. They received support from Israel's National Security Minister and another minister, both visiting the site to mark Tisha B'Av, the day of mourning over the destruction of the two ancient Jewish temples that stood at the site.
We are on Tisha B'Av, the Temple Mount. We have come here to commemorate the destruction of the temple. It should be said honestly that there is very, very great progress here in the governance, in sovereignty, in images of Jews praying. Our policy is to allow prayer, but I also say one more thing. We must win this war. We must win, not go to summits in Doha or Cairo, but to defeat them, to bring them down to their knees. This is the message. We can defeat Hamas and bring them down to their knees.
Considered the holiest site in Judaism and the third holiest site for Muslims, the Temple Mount and El Aqsa Mosque compound is governed by a vague, unwritten status quo. Under these agreements, non-Muslims may visit the site in the heart of Jerusalem's Old City, but are not allowed to pray. However, these limitations have been increasingly eroded in recent years. So before visits by Jews, they receive special instructions from the police, under the responsibility of Minister Ben-Gvir.
We ask that you adhere to the instructions of the police. Religious worship of any kind is prohibited on the Temple Mount, including the entry of holy utensils. Singing, protesting, or clapping are not allowed.
Jordan and Egypt slammed Ben-Gvir's visit, calling it an irresponsible provocation. It was also condemned by Israeli politicians, secular and Orthodox, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying through his office that there is, quote, no change to Temple Mount status quo and that Ben-Gvir has no private policy. In response, Ben-Gvir doubled down and issued a defiant statement claiming his policy is to enable freedom of worship for Jews at all places, including the Temple Mount, and that Jews will continue to do so in the future as well. Palestinians consider such acts as a provocation aimed at taking over the site. In fact, there is no other issue more effective in incitement campaigns by Palestinian terror groups. And despite Israel being at war, its national security minister continues to challenge the fragile status quo, and not just on the Temple Mount.
Well, for more, let's go to our correspondent, Balir Sladin, who is at the Western Wall Plaza, which, of course, is facing towards the Temple Mount itself. And Balir, first of all, Itamar Ben-Gvir, chastised a little, you might say, by Prime Minister Netanyahu, but he is not backing down.
Yeah, he isn't backing down, and he even responded to the Prime Minister's office statement saying that he has his own policy for letting Jews inside the Temple Mount and letting them pray there. He's even saying that this is his policy that is against racism against Jews, because they can actually pray everywhere. Now, we know that this is a very sensitive location, especially in these times of war and in times where even Hamas and Hezbollah both are calling their operations against Israel something that is related to Al-Aqsa Mosque, something that is related to Jerusalem. But Ben Gvir, maybe for his own political benefit, but also maybe because he doesn't want Israel to go with this deal. He wants to jeopardize the deal, and that's, by the way, what the families of the hostages forum, they called him out and said that he is continuing to jeopardize the hostage deal, and he doesn't want the hostages back to Israel, and that's why he is doing what he is doing today. Now, this has been in this morning, 2,000 Jews prayed inside the Temple Mount, something that is against the status quo. But Ben Gvir was there, not his first time in the Temple Mount, but maybe this is the most provocative as we've seen.
Right, and maybe just for our viewers outside Israel or those who are not observant Jews, we should explain, right behind you, you see crowds of people there at the Western Wall, what we call the Kotel in the plaza there. And that is sometimes mistakenly seen as Israel's holiest site. In fact, no, it's the Temple Mount itself. But for centuries, rabbis, rabbinical authorities have said Jews shouldn't pray on the Temple Mount. They should pray as close as they can get without being on the Mount, and that is that area right below you there at the Kotel. So this Ben Gvir going against the government policy, but also, of course, centuries of Orthodox rabbinical authority.
Yes, exactly. And maybe while we're talking at it, let's just see what is happening here. By the way, just half an hour ago, the prayers has finished, and the Tisha B'Av has also ended. But right now, they are breaking the fasting here in Jerusalem, as we see. And some are still here in front of the Western Wall praying. Of course, by the way, today as well, some of the families of the hostages joined the worshippers, and also families of fallen soldiers. They joined the worshippers, calling for, first of all, unity in Israel, especially in these times of disagreements, of protests everywhere, but also for the return of the hostages, of course. They have joined the worshippers here behind me in this sacred day of the year. That is, without a doubt, of course, talking to some worshippers, they have some fears because of the anticipated Iranian attack on Israel. But although that there is some fear and the situation, of course, tense, but thousands of people, I would say tens of thousands of people, has been praying here, or have been praying here behind me in front of the Western Wall, calling again for unity and for the return of the hostages.
Right. Thank you, Balia Sladin there at Western Wall Plaza. Thank you for that. And calling for unity, I'll just remind you, gentlemen, that the rabbinical sages say what really destroyed the Second Temple were not the Babylonians or the Romans, but internal discord among the Jewish people, the Israelites. So something to keep in mind.
Israel's not running short on internal discord these days, but specifically on these Temple Mount tensions. On the one hand, you have the official rabbinate and the Orthodox establishment forbidding entry on the Temple Mount, but then you have these nationalistic elements in the religious Zionism, religious body, that are pushing for it. And here you see the discrepancy, and what's leading the latter group is nationalistic objectives rather than religious objectives. Yes, they say for religious purposes it should be free for people of all faiths to pray in the site that is holy for all faiths. You can have a debate on that, but specifically the nationalistic element part to try and show sovereignty, try to erode the status quo in a way that, in their eyes, brings the pendulum towards Israel Israel's control, not only security control, but also religious control. That's what they want, and that's what Israel's partners and other Muslim elements in the Middle East are concerned of.
Right, and we should note the Moshe Gafni of the ultra-Orthodox United Torah Judaism Party, what we call the Haredi sector, which is less nationalistic.
The Haredis are totally against
this. Condemning Itamar Ben-Gvir specifically today, so we have to keep in that's something to keep in mind. Well, since Balir raised it, let's turn now to the hostage issue. The U.S. is calling on Hamas to go back on its refusal to send representatives to this planned summit meeting of the key mediators, which also includes Qatar and Egypt, which is set to take place Thursday at a still undisclosed or undecided location. Meanwhile, the Office of Prime Minister Netanyahu, reacting to reports that he keeps adding new conditions in order to delay a deal that could pose him with political problems, said today in a statement the charges that Prime Minister Netanyahu added conditions to the May 27 proposal is false. Prime Minister Netanyahu's July 27 letter does not introduce extra conditions and certainly does not contradict or undermine the May 27 proposal. In fact, Hamas is the one that demanded 29 changes to the proposal, something the Prime Minister refused to do. Well, Israelis who do accuse Netanyahu of stalling a deal are out demonstrating again tonight in Tel Aviv. But there is one protester that you won't find at any of these demonstrations because Nir Kaftori has decided a silent lone protest is his best way of serving the 115 hostages still in Gaza. Reporter Mir Yonah has his story.
Someone stopped next to me and asked me how I feel. Suddenly I don't see. I hear the sound of crying. So I lift the blindfold and I see a man sitting in a car, crying and crying. And he couldn't. I'm virtually crying now. He wasn't able to hold back his tears.
You might be surprised the influence one individual person can make. One person who decides to take a brave step which defies all possible logic.
I was looking for something on a personal level because I don't want to start organizing here, not demonstrating, not signs, not people. I get up in the morning. This is my weapon, yeah? A blindfold, another cloth to tie my hands behind my back, and I go alone and sit down. That's all.
In the heavy summer heat, in the middle of a busy intersection, Nir Kaftori sits for hours, barefoot, eyes blindfolded and hands bound. No placard, no megaphone, using his body to convey a message for the hostages.
I don't show anything of what they are going through, but at least the physical, external element, the one where they sit bound and they see what's going on around them, not always because they are blindfolded, but because maybe they sit in the dark. So yeah, I bring a little of what those who pass by and see me.
He doesn't go to the big protests, doesn't shout slogans. He's not interested in being labeled left-wing or right-wing. He just sits alone, quietly, under conditions that may resemble, even if only slightly, the harsh conditions of the abductees in Gaza.
I have no political message here. I don't have any sign with me. I don't shout any slogans. I sit as I imagine some 20-year-old soldier has been sitting for 10 months in a Hamas tunnel.
Do you feel like the protests have lost their impact?
The protests? Look, it keeps up some kind of momentum. There's a protest, but I don't see what kind of impact it makes. I don't see it influencing anything. It even enhances the gaps. This divides the existing in our nation today. And that's why I try to find a corner that I can enter in the middle and split and come and present the human side. I am a human being.
Nir draws many reactions. Car honks that signal support. People come out to hug and help. But there are also negative reactions.
Sometimes someone drives by on a scooter and curses me. Why would someone who sees a human tied up in the middle of an intersection, not expressing any political position, why would they curse me?
Nir's protest has gained traction, and more people have joined the silent struggle, standing at intersections in the hope of having an impact.
Nir has touched something very significant, which is the individual's ability to make a difference. There's no need for a huge protest of millions. You don't need difficult activities. Just the silence of one person sitting can change things in the world.
The helplessness, the fear, and the uncertainty. delivered in a chilling manner. The public cannot remain indifferent. In our day-to-day life, we're time takes its course. You move on and you're there. I really recommend it to everyone. Take an hour somewhere. Sit down, put on a blindfold, and stop your life for an hour and understand for a second what is happening here. In a reality where life goes on and people go through another routine day, Mil is here to remind us all that they are still there, bound and helpless for over 10 months.
There are thoughts that pass. You need to know to control them. What are you doing for 2 or 3 hours without talking, without seeing, without anything? Even this part is hard. Plus sitting in the heat and the sweat. I wouldn't call it hard, but it's not easy. It's challenging.
Well, I think the lesson is we all should remember the hostages in our own way. And moving on, Israel's economy, already suffering from the impact of the Gaza war, took a further blow today when international credit ratings agency Fitch downgraded the country's credit rating from A+ to A, citing the growing geopolitical risks as the conflict drags on. Fitch also maintained its negative rating outlook, saying, keeping it as negative, saying if Israel enters into a battle with Iran and its proxies, it risks further damaging business activity, investment, and infrastructure. Well, the shekel lost over 1.5% against the dollar on the news, and Tel Aviv stocks also fell. Prime Minister Netanyahu's office responded with a statement saying the Israeli economy is strong and is functioning well. The lowering of the rating is a result of Israel having to cope with a multi-front war that was forced on it. The rating will be raised again when we win, and we will win. And also Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich added, quote, Israel's economy is strong, and we are navigating it correctly and responsibly. Well, joining us now, someone who knows quite a bit about ratings for these kind of ratings is Zvi Eckstein, Dean of the Tiomkin School of Economics at Reichman University. And he is the former deputy governor of the Bank of Israel. Zvi, thanks for joining us. Let me first ask you, how certainly the prime minister and finance minister don't think it's that significant. How significant is this downgrade in rating?
It is significant because Fitch has been very patient with Israel for a while. The other two rating agencies already moved in both of the negative outlook and the reduction of the rating at the beginning, just after the war started. And what Fitch says is the expenses of the war is amazing. The government has a huge challenge how to make the economy to grow and to support the ability and the challenges and the military challenges. We see actually the war is expanding and is probably going to continue. And just by declaration of Netanyahu and Smotrich, economic is not moving. I mean, they do nothing. And the fact that they do nothing basically signal to the markets that Israel is the economic outlook look negative, and that mean that maybe the other two would downgrade even more in the near future if the government will not take what are obvious policies, which is to reduce expenses, increase some taxes, and actually have promoting growth with supporting the high tech and the real estate market, and other way to make the economy to cope with the huge economic challenge coming from the war.
Right. The argument they're making is Israel has had conflicts in the past. I'll go back. Second Lebanon War is a good example. And while certain industries like tourism take considerable time to recover, and the Israeli economy has shown resilience, is there any reason to be more concerned this time that the conditions may not be right for even if somehow the security situation would stabilize, we wouldn't bounce back as quickly as we had in the past?
Well, they wrongly interpret the past. First, almost all the incidents in the past were very short and ended up quickly, and the economy has been taken all the action, both in 2006 and both in 2014. Moreover, the more intensive war, which was long, was in the Second Intifada in 2002, 2003, and Ariel Sharon, in the middle of this war, called for elections, and then he made Benjamin Netanyahu the finance minister, and they took severe actions of reducing expenses, of promoting growth by incentivizing people to go to work. They did what should have been done in 2023. And when the finance minister staff came to the finance minister and the prime minister and say, let's do again in 2023 what you did in 2003, and they send them home and say, not this time. And that's the main problem.
Right. I'll give one example because it's quite striking, which is the then Finance Minister Netanyahu cut back on some of the subsidies to the ultra-Orthodox sector, which is exactly what he is now opposing as Prime Minister.
Yeah, because now it's everything political for his political survival or whatever reasons he think. It's true that the Israeli economy is strong. Has been strong, but it is going down here. It has been strong mainly from reform done in 2003 and the huge growth of the high-tech sector from 2017 to 2022. But since he has been in office, both in 23 with the judiciary revolution and also with the war, the high-tech sector is on risk. We are lucky that so far it has not been deteriorated. But if steps will not be taken to control the budget deficits and to be able to pay for the challenges of this war and the potential extension of the war in the north, then the economic outlook for Israel will be negative, and we will see high cost in terms of high interest rate, which are already went high. And it's very costly for the government to borrow and for individuals to borrow and to buy houses, etc., etc.
And this would affect eventually the security situation as well and Israel's capability to finance its military efforts. V. Eckstein.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you for joining us again on I-24 News.
Thank you for having me.
Let's turn now to U.S. politics, but of course something very much connected to what we've been talking about. The Republican presidential candidate, Donald Trump, has returned to Twitter after a long hiatus, having secured the endorsement of its owner, Elon Musk. Now, to mark his return, Musk conducted a live interview with Trump last night on the platform, which started late due to some technical issues. Musk has blamed this on a hacking attack. And this, of course, comes after the Trump campaign claimed that it was the target of an Iranian hacking attack. The FBI is actually now investigating those allegations. And during the interview, Trump claimed that if he was in office, Iran would not even consider attacking Israel and that the October 7th attack wouldn't have happened. He's spoken about that before. And, of course, Trump also spoke about Jews. Well, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, who's in New York, and let's talk about what Trump said and take maybe a little listen to it, Mike.
Well, keep in mind a little bit of context here. So Elon Musk and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, met last year in San Francisco on Netanyahu's way to the United Nations, and they started to develop a bit of a relationship. Of course, there's a technological angle to it. Israel's always interested in that. And Netanyahu invited Musk to Netanyahu's joint address to a session of Congress, last month or so ago. So they have something going between them there. Now, Musk brought up that address by Netanyahu to Congress last month to Trump during their discussion yesterday on X, formerly Twitter. And Musk brought up that one person who wasn't in attendance at that address of Netanyahu was Kamala Harris. Harris, at the time, was just newly appointed, however you want to call it, anointed, the Democratic nominee for a president. This was just days after Joe Biden essentially withdrew from a competition for the presidency for the next term. So that's the context to this conversation. Here's Musk and Trump yesterday on X.
Netanyahu came to give a talk to a joint Senate and House sitting, and I was there. And Kamala stood him up. What does that say?
I think it's highly disrespectful. And I say, if you're a Jewish person or if you believe in Israel, if you're a a person that, is very pro-Israel. If you vote for her, it's worse than Biden, and Biden was bad. But if you vote for her, you ought to have your head examined.
Now, Kalev, here's the issue. This is nothing that Trump hasn't said before in one form or fashion. 99% of what was discussed yesterday between Trump and Musk has been said in one form or fashion by one or both of those men before. That's the problem here for Donald Trump, Kalev, is that essentially it might as well be a repeat of the rally he had in Montana next week. It doesn't impact anything. It doesn't change the conversation. Trump is now desperately trying to regain the momentum that he had prior to Biden withdrawing from the race. And nothing he has done so far, statements, rallies, surrogates, the vice presidential pick, the convention, nothing has really done much of anything. The convention came beforehand. Nothing has done much of anything to change the dynamic since Biden dropped out and Kamala Harris became the nominee, presumptive or otherwise. And this conversation with Musk, fact-checking, no fact, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't change the conversation in any positive way for Trump. And that, in and of itself, is a wasted opportunity for the Republican nominee.
Right. And I'll just add, Donald Trump is quite focused on the Jewish vote, which in presidential elections is not especially decisive. And the majority of Jews don't vote on issues related to Israel or their Jewishness anyway, according to polls. So it's interesting that this has become such a focus for him. Mike Wagenheim there in New York, thank you for that. And speaking of the U.S., an update, Ariel, on something we've been talking about.
Yeah, the expected visit of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to the region has reportedly been postponed. That's due to uncertainty about the situation regarding the impending retaliation by Iran. This is based on reporting by Axios. We know that CIA chief is in the region and also Brett McGurk, special envoy in the region.
Right.
This trip postponed.
All right, so it seems. Ariel Osran, Zach Anders, thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us on this edition of The Rundown on I-24 News.